I'm Calvin Ryerse. I'm a recent grad of the New School in New York City. So I'm a filmmaker, I'm a community organizer. Uh, for a couple of years, I was working in the like anti-nuclear bomb organizing space. I worked with Global Zero and formerly Beyond the Bomb. And so I was like a fellow with them, and I was like doing content creation, writing blogs, making zines, editing videos, producing web shows. Yeah, and then I also I did a podcast and a written essay with Inkstick about the Marshallese community in Springdale, Arkansas, which is where I grew up. It's my hometown, and that was really fun. Kind of like bringing like these issues that I grew up around to a bigger audience. Yeah, and now I'm a freelance filmmaker. I'm working with the director Nathan Fitch, who's also a filmmaker here in New York City, on a documentary about the Marshallese in Springdale and also like neighboring parts of the Ozarks. I think that I'm particularly interested in filmmaking and like arts in general, and like the like way that that can kind of like affect social change, and also its like limitations on affecting social change. Yeah, so I'm an artist, and I'm also like interested in like theories of art and change in society. This is a good question. I think that if I were to give a guest lecture, I would want to talk about this question of like what makes a piece of art or a piece of work impactful in the world, and like what does that mean, what does that look like, and then it's interesting, like there's a couple of different like theorists who like go about this question, and like what does like the like kind of individual emotional impact of art, what does that mean when we're trying to make like large structural changes in the world. Yeah, this has been a question that I've been like kind of like fascinated by. I don't know if I couldn't have articulated that in high school, but like I've been fascinated by this like process since high school, and it seems like it's just one that's going to be around for the rest of my life. Yeah, yeah, I would say that I'm interested in mentoring high school and college students. I started teaching with an after school program, so I'm teaching like younger kids like filmmaking techniques and practices. Yeah, and I found it to be a really like kind of wonderful uh, thing. I really enjoy teaching and mentoring. Yeah, so I grew up in Springdale, which has the largest Marshallese population outside of the Marshall Islands themselves. And so I was kind of like grew up friends with people who are Marshallese and kind of like aware of like this thing of like the US like in the 40s and 50s dropped, I think it's 67 nuclear bombs, testing them in and around the islands, and were not did not care about the way that that would impact the ecosystem and the people who were living there. And yeah, and so kind of in the like 80s and 90s, organizations like Tyson Foods, and others like kind of like figure out a way to like bring Marshallese people over to the US. They settled in Springdale, kind of giving them low wage poultry jobs. And there's kind of this like exploitation dynamic that's happening. So I was like, grew up like aware of these issues and was like, oh, this is something that like is very particular and is like um, exists on the like macro levels of like colonization and nuclear weapons and kind of like Cold War feelings. And then it's also like so personal and is like my friends that I interact with on a daily basis in like band. And so, yeah, so that's kind of how I got kind of like first introduced to it. was this thing of like, oh wow, like my friends and their families have a like a lower standard of living, uh and like this is and like nobody knows why, and like this is wild to me. So that's kind of how I got into it. um yeah. Yeah, so I mean, career path, like I'm only 21. I feel like I'm first like I'm still like deciding what I want my career path to be, but in high school I was working with a group of friends. We made like an arts political kind of Gen Z magazine called Dear Adult World that we ran for a couple of years. And I got uh yeah, I got locked in with Beyond the Bomb and Global Zero, and I learned a lot there about yeah, about this issue, and that was really great. I learned a lot and worked with them for I think a year and a half. Yeah, and then kind of like running parallel to that, I'm also a filmmaker, and have been working on documentaries and now personal documentaries. I have a narrative piece that I wrote and directed that is in its final editing stages. Um, yeah, and I've just been like hopping around on film sets. I guess I'm also a teacher now too. I think that the thing about nuclear bombs is that people are like, oh, like that's like a Cold War thing. That doesn't affect us anymore. But in actuality, like uh, nuclear bombs intersect with every issue that we care about, whether that be racial justice, economic justice, uh, like LGBTQ issues, gender issues. Like the like nuclear weapons are like a way in which like the capital system is like perpetuated, and that's like we spend like trillions and trillions of dollars on them, uh, decade after decade, even though they like kind of like promise they're like perpetuation like promises like our existential demise. And so like if people care about like um on a large scale like being alive and having a society that like operates, then they should care about nuclear weapons. If people care about like colonization, that like right, like the Marshall Islands issue like intersects with that. If people care about like Medicare and having money in the US's budget to like fund like resources that we need to like be a functioning society, then they should care about nuclear weapons because we spend so much money on it. Um, and like there's all these ways in which nukes like uh, are fused together in this like broader system of exploitation that exists in the world, and yeah, and so people should care about it because it's important, uh and also like is like it feels like it's an issue that like requires like a high level of understanding. But like here I am, like some like 21-year-old kid who like moved from Arkansas to New York City and like have carved out like space in my life to understand how this works and how it intersects with everything else that I care about. I am concerned about the like trend, particularly in the Republican Party towards fascism and the like anti-trans rhetoric and legislation that has been ubiquitous since the Republicans like took control or took like some power in the last election. Yeah, and I'm also like doubly concerned with the like kind of there's an attitude of apathy towards issues that I think like that it's just so overwhelming right now that like people are just trying to like get by and survive, and they like just like can't care about other people or about the way that politics are like affecting people's lives right now. Yeah, so I'm concerned about like increased violence and polarization, and I'm concerned about the apathy that that creates. And yeah, even in myself, I'm trying to like always move through that like hopeless feeling and be like, man, like I kind of feel hopeless about the world, and also like it that isn't helpful in making the world that I want. and I can have that feeling and also still really care about other people and still really care about um, making the world that I want to see.